humans may in fact possess some kind of innate moral precepts that are universal in nature and may actually be rooted in human anatomy. Could you elaborate on that bit in particular, and what kind of research results are coming out of this area of study?
Well, actually, a lot of this goes back to an observation by David Hume back in the mid-18th century. He pointed out that we make moral judgments in a fairly consistent way in entirely new situations, and we seem to do that without any limit. We're constantly facing new situations. We make moral judgments. We make them pretty well the same way others do. And he said this is only possible if there are some principles which are part of our nature from which these moral judgments are derived. He called these instincts, not what he called our original instincts, those that we share with other animals, like wanting food and so on, but some special instinct, a kind of a moral instinct, if you like, that's part of our nature, which must involve some principles. Well, this is a history that proceeds with this, through the major philosophers. It was picked up in modern times by John Rawls, who's the leading political philosopher American political philosopher of the last century. He modeled himself very explicitly on linguistic grammars, those of the 1960s. That's when he was writing. Actually, we were friends. And tried to ask what a moral grammar would be for the concept of justice, which is his interest. That was not his main point. It's just an analogy that he picked up, and it's the correct analogy, I think. Well, in the last few years, there are people who've been taking up that idea much more systematically. One of them was a graduate student here, John Mikhail, has a number of papers and a book coming out of it, now teaches at Georgetown Law School. Another is Mark Hauser, professor of cognitive science and primatology at Harvard, who's been doing interesting studies. He also has a book that just came out called Moral Minds on how human beings and using whatever comparative analysis there is, but how human beings do in fact make judgments in rather complex moral situations. A lot of this is based on work done by moral philosophers in the last 20, 30 years who have done thought experiments. They've asked, how would you respond to the following kind of situation? And the results are pretty surprising. Like people make different judgments even if the outcomes of the actions are the same. Like if you're carrying out an action which will lead to the death of a person and save 5 people, under certain circumstances, people will agree to do it. Under other circumstances, they won't agree to do it. And now there's experimental work on this, started by Mikhail, carried out by Hauser, now a lot of others. And it's with children, it's cross-culturally. You get pretty constant results, and some of the principles are emerging. Now, this is not. Notice that this is not going to tell you what it's right to do. That's a different question. This is going to tell you what our moral nature is to the extent that you can carry it out. And that's a prerequisite to asking any further questions. So that's it tends, it aims towards a moral grammar, which would account for moral judgments the same way, maybe, or in a parallel way, to the way in which a linguistic grammar tries to account for the interpretation of the expressions that you and I are now using.
We have run very low on time, Professor Chomsky. My final question for you is that in the next couple of weeks, we expect to interview the new director of the Peace Corps on this program. I haven't had a chance to do a lot of research on the topics we'd like to cover, but I was wondering from your experience in researching U.S. foreign policy, if you have come across any information that might prompt an interesting question for that conversation and what that question might be.
Well, my impression of, in general, my attitude toward the Peace Corps is pretty positive. But I should say my general impression over the years is that the Peace Corps has been more helpful to the United States than it has been to the countries where the Peace Corps operated. Now, it may have done good things in those countries, like, if Peace Corps volunteers help build, say, wells in a place in Africa where people don't have access to water, or start a school somewhere in South Asia or whatever it may be. That's good. That can help people. But the main effect that has been important is that these people who go somewhere else learn about what the world is like. They see that the world is not the way it is, the way we're trained to think about it. They gain an understanding of the perspective of people who are at the wrong end of the guns. And that's very valuable. And a lot of them have come back and done very constructive work here, helping Americans understand that our view of the world is extremely warped. We're viewing the world from the point of view of extreme privilege and power, from the point of view of those who hold the clubs, not the ones who are beaten by the clubs. And that's always a dangerous stand to take. And to the extent that the Peace Corps carries out that educational purpose, it's of great value, quite independently of what help it may give to the people who it's working with.
Noam Chomsky, it has been a privilege and a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Good to talk to you.